Hey, you're listening to Rising into Mindful Motherhood. I'm your host, Dr. Katie Wood. I'm a barefoot mama bear, pharmacist, integrative fertility health coach, and lover of all things nature and animals. I'm on a mission to have intentional conversations about the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to fertility, pregnancy, postpartum, and beyond. My mindful guests and I will be talking about struggles, wins, natural wellness, and how we grow and transform as we enter motherhood. My background in healthcare has shown me how broken our medical system is. My own struggles to become pregnant has shown the lack of support for mamas to be, the lack of guidance for women to have a nourishing and vibrant pregnancy, the isolation, mom guilt, and all the things we hold after bringing baby earthside. I want this platform to be a place where women can feel connected, safe, and supported to share and hear their stories. A place to use our voice to discuss and advocate about what we need and deserve as mothers. So let's dive in, shall we? Okay, hello and welcome to Rising into Mindful Motherhood. I am excited for our conversation today. I'll be chatting with Karaleigh, who is a mama of three, as well as a singer-songwriter. She'll be sharing today about her birth and family story and how she finds the brighter side of things. Welcome, Karaleigh. I'm so happy to have you here today.
Hello, I'm so happy to be here.
Awesome. So let's just dive right in. Why don't you tell me a little bit about your beautiful family and then we'll jump into your birth story.
Awesome. All right, so my family is a little wild. I have three kids. They are 12, 11, and 8, and they are all on the autism spectrum. So my oldest and my youngest are high functioning, although I have to insert here that that doesn't mean that it's easy. They certainly have a lot of struggles and things that we're working on, but it mostly means that their communication skills are pretty solid. And then my middle son, who is 11, is severely autistic. I consider him semi-verbal because for a really long time he was entirely nonverbal, and then he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and actually it kind of sparked his language skills. And so we have this like amazing journey of that whole story. And then my husband has actually been disabled for about the last decade, and he's had this really crazy journey of recovery, and he's actually doing really great now.
Wow, that's amazing. So it definitely sounds like you have your hands full and like a lot of it must fall on your shoulders. It must feel like at
Oh
times.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's really what piqued your interest in your podcast, right? Because you are a fellow
Absolutely.
podcaster as well.
Yeah. Well, and my podcast is called Seeking Sunshine, which you were talking about, like finding the joy. Like when I was looking at like what can I do that would help people, like what could I teach people that would like, what can I contribute to the world? I was like, how can I use my crazy life and all these things I've been through to help people? And that was it. I have been able to see the sunshine, maybe not perfectly all the time, but I've learned how to find the joy and find the positives in the different trials I've been through. And how can I help other people is by helping them see those the beauty that is there, even when things are really
Absolutely.
hard.
Yeah, that's really a beautiful way of looking at it. And I'm sure all the interviews that you've done and the other stories that you've heard also puts things into perspective for you as well, because
Absolutely.
it's not always, the grass is not always greener on the other side, right?
No, and what's lovely is like hearing communicating with other people and connecting on this deeper level that we get to do in podcast interviewing. It
Mhm.
really just opens up it opens up your perspective to see, what other people are also really struggling, and I'm not alone in going through hard things.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's so important to know, even just when you're out in the world, that you never know what somebody is going through.
It is so true.
So if someone maybe they just look miserable or you bump into them on accident and they get upset with you, but you just have no idea what they're going through, and maybe they don't have the tools to maybe shift their perspective on what's going on in their life. So I think it's amazing that
Yeah.
you're doing this to help really provide like some support and connection for everyone and anyone
Yeah.
really.
Well, and along those lines of what you were saying about like other people struggling and we just don't know, one of my very favorite quotes is actually from Frozen. And in one of the songs, they say, "People make bad choices when they're mad or scared or stressed." And I
Mm,
love to look at other people's actions through that lens of like,
mhm,
you don't know what they're going through, and their reactions are because of things that they are going through, because of their own trauma, because of their own stress.
mhm.
Usually, people's reactions have nothing to do with us, it has to do with what is going on in their own mind.
Yeah, definitely. Well, let's dive in about your third birth. I know when we talked, it was quite the story. So,
It is kind of an epic saga.
yeah. So
All
let's
right.
dive in.
So Benjamin was born in May of 2014, and at that time we had just moved to Texas from California. We had moved away from my family and next to my husband's family, and I had two toddlers, Joshua and Aurora. And Aurora had been diagnosed with autism, but Joshua was too young. So she was about three, no, she was right about four, and Joshua was almost three. And so he couldn't get diagnosed till he turned three, and she was diagnosed when she was three, but we had a good hunch that he was on the spectrum too. And so I actually have to back it up a little bit because Joshua's birth, 3 years, 2.5 years ish before this, was really traumatic, and it sparked a lot of my fears in Benjamin's birth because Joshua, I was in a ton of pain for a really long time, and it turned out that I was actually dilated to a 3.5 for 3 weeks before he was born. So I could hardly walk. I was in so much pain. And then he was 9 pounds when he was born, and he came so fast. My labor was about an hour and a half with Joshua. He came so fast that they didn't have time to give me any drugs. And the only reason that I was able to get through Joshua's birth is because I literally had no other choice. Like, if I could have stopped any of it, I would have, because it was so, like, just mind bogglingly painful. And so when it came time for Benjamin's birth, I was like, no, doctor, you don't understand. Like, subsequent babies tend to have shorter labors and be heavier. And so I was like, I'm going to have a 10-pound baby in half an hour of labor at home by myself with two autistic toddlers. Like, this is what's going to happen. And I was so worried about that, like, being what was going to happen with my birth. And so my doctor wouldn't listen to me. And we had just moved there about halfway through my pregnancy. And I was so frustrated with this male doctor who I'd ended up with in this practice. I didn't really have any way to vet anybody, and just kind of like jumped in there, and he just rubbed me the wrong way. Like, he wasn't listening to me. He brushed off all of my concerns. And at 37 weeks, I finally decided that I'd had enough, and I decided to switch doctors very, very late in my pregnancy because this guy just was not listening to my concerns. And so I prayed. I'm very religious, and I prayed really hard that, because I didn't know any of these other doctors in this practice, and I just prayed that I'd be able to find, the right doctor who would listen to me and would take care of these concerns and take them seriously. And I ended up with this female doctor who ended up saving my son's life. Like, if it had not been for her, he would not be alive today. It was miraculous. And so I switched doctors at 37 weeks, and it changed the course of my whole life because I listened to that little voice in my head going, something's not right here. This doesn't feel right. And so I'm really thankful for that, and for her for listening to me. And this whole story is full of like a lot of trauma, but a lot of really, really amazing miracles. So I switched doctors. I was gonna say, jump in if you want to say something.
I just want to say that am so happy for you that you listened to that voice because even though you knew you weren't clicking with this doctor and he wasn't listening to you, um, even jumping on the other coin of hiring someone else, like that's also a gamble too. So, both
Yeah,
sides can be really scary. Like, okay, I can stay with this doctor who's not listening to me and brushing off my concerns, or I can gamble on another doctor when I could literally go into labor any day. And I think that happens. Like so many women get put into that situation and sometimes we just act out of fear and we just stay where we are. And sometimes we don't know that we have options, you're not married to your doctor. There's no contract. You're
right,
the one hiring that doctor at the end of the day. They are serving you. You're paying
hmm
them. Your insurance is paying them, whatever the situation may be. So I'm so happy for you.
hmm
That really makes me so happy and it makes my skin crawl when I hear about stories of doctors just, not listening to
Well,
their
and I
patients.
just cannot even begin to think about what could have happened.
Yeah.
I just don't want to go there. Um, so I talked to my doctor about all my concerns about having, my son, him being 10 pounds and me having him in half an hour labor at home. And I convinced her, or she listened. I don't know. We decided to have me be induced, which I would have happily been induced long before because I find pregnancy miserable, especially at the end. Um, I would have happily been induced sooner, but I was induced at 39 weeks 1 day. So it was still full term. It was still far into this pregnancy. So 39 weeks 1 day, they sent me to the hospital, and my husband and I had a last meal right before we went, and my kids were at my in-laws, and they put me on Pitocin, and I sat there in the hospital on Pitocin for 24 hours before I saw my doctor. Which was
Oof.
very, very frustrating because I was on Pitocin and then they gave me an epidural and everything was going perfectly smoothly, except for the part where I hadn't eaten in 24 hours. So I was starving and I was so bored and I was like,
Mm.
let's just move this along. Like, why is this taking forever? But I was progressing and everything was going great. And then finally, my doctor came around 8 p.m. the following day and she told me that the reason it had taken her so long was because she wanted to make sure she finished all of her duties at her clinic and that she'd be able to devote her full attention to me. So I was
Mm.
like, okay. So she came to break my water was what we were kind of waiting on. Was all with all of my pregnancies I've had to have my water be broken because I guess it's really thick. It just doesn't break on its own like ever. So I don't even know what I was dilated to, probably a 6 or something like that. And it just wasn't progressing because my water hadn't broken. And so she came in to break my water. And I'm so thankful for the epidural because, she gets all up in there. I'm like, can't feel it. Hallelujah. So she gets all up in there and she breaks my water. And then all these alarms start going off and all these people start filing into the room and she is cool as a cucumber and she's all digging around up there and she's just got this look on her face like trying to figure this out and she's going, okay, so I think I feel cord wrapped around and at this point like there's 20 doctors in the room and they're unhooking me from all the cords and I'm like halfway out the door and she's going, oh, so we're just gonna take you to the OR and we're just gonna see if his heart rate will go back and we're just gonna check you out and just maybe we might have to do an emergency C-section. And at this point, I'm halfway out the door. They've got me all unhooked. There's people. It's all chaos, and she's just calm. And I'm like, can my husband come? And she's like, sure. And then they didn't let him come, and they shut the door in his face and like blocked him and wouldn't let him out. So they raced me off to the OR. And they asked me, "Oh, can you feel this?" Because I'd had an epidural. So they asked me, they put like a knife against my stomach to see if I could feel it, and I was like, "Yeah, yeah, I can feel it." Um, and that was it. When I could feel it, they said, okay, and then they put a ketamine mask on me.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and this is totally an interesting like offshoot tidbit thing is that I didn't realize that I had PTSD from that moment until I watched some movie about old guys robbing a bank or something in the movie theater, and they showed a mask coming at the camera, and I in my seat I like flipped out and was like,
Oh,
"Oh my gosh." Like I didn't realize it was years and years later. I didn't even realize that I'd had PTSD from that moment.
wow.
So they gave me this so they never told me anything. They didn't tell me about the heart rate. They didn't tell me, oh, it doesn't look better. So we're going to, like, they told me nothing. They were just like, can you feel this? Yes. Okay. Out. And they gave me, ketamine. And I had never had anything like that before. This was actually like my first surgery of my life. And when I started coming to, I was, I was like, guys, I was hallucinating. Like, I was like so out of it that was what I was trying to communicate to people in the room. Like, dude, I was just hallucinating. Like, this has never happened to me before. But as I slowly was like coming to, because it felt like a million year process
Mm.
where it started with me trying to say this thing to them, but words were not actually coming out of my mouth. Even though I felt like I was trying to say them, nothing was actually coming out. And then it started like dawning on me like, oh yeah, here's what's going on. And I'm looking around and all the nurses are just like bustling around, but they would not look at me. And I'm starting to come into it. My voice is slowly starting to come back, and I'm going, okay, where's Jacob? Where's my husband? Right? Because you have this picture, or at least I did. I had this picture in my head of here's what a C-section looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Dad is sitting next to mom's head, and they put the baby on the mom's chest. And yeah, it sucks that you had a C-section, but there's the baby and there's dad, and it's this
Mm-hmm.
beautiful little moment. I didn't have that. And
Mm.
so when I woke up and that wasn't what was happening, I started panicking more than I ever have in my entire life. And then when I started asking, where's my husband? And they wouldn't look at me, the panic like grew into a
Yeah.
very extreme amount of panic, and no one was looking at me. I had no idea what had just happened, and they wheeled me back to my room, and my mom was there. They had just driven from California, and she's going, oh, did you have the baby? And I'm going, I literally don't even know. No one told, I don't know. And so in the meantime, while all that was happening and I'm floating in the clouds somewhere else, my husband finally burst out of our hospital room just in time to see our son, who had been delivered by emergency C-section 7 minutes later. Like within 7 minutes of them taking me back, they had
Mm-hmm.
just cut him open, got him out. And my husband saw him being wheeled like completely lifeless to the NICU. And we got a lot of different reports from the nurses. Like one of them said that he wasn't breathing, and one of them said he didn't have a heart rate. And I'm not totally sure which one's true. I still don't know what his official birth weight was. Like, I have no idea. So my husband saw him like limp and purple being wheeled to the NICU, and that's a big cause of PTSD for my husband, was seeing that,
I'm
seeing our
sure.
son in that state. So my husband was able to follow him to the NICU and get in there, even though he wasn't really supposed to. And the doctor in the NICU was telling my husband, yeah, we can have him baptized right now, and you should take lots of pictures right now. Like basically indicating like he's not going to make it. You need to do whatever you can with these moments because this is it.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, we're very religious, and we're members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and we believe in priesthood power and priesthood blessings. So the first thing that my husband did was give our son a blessing, was put his hands on his head and give him a priesthood blessing, and he started coming back to life from that moment on. And what was incredible was that we were in San Antonio, Texas, which isn't like a huge. Right now we're in Utah, where there's tons and tons of members of our church, but over there it's not a huge population. All of the nurses in the NICU saw him do that, rushed up to him and said, "We're members of the church. Can we get someone to help you do another blessing?"
Mm.
And it was like this, just it was miraculous, and he started coming back to life after that, basically. So meanwhile, I'm in my hospital room just panicking, sobbing. Like, my doctor finally came in and kind of gave me a rundown of what happened. He had like medically induced, or not, I'm sorry, that he had event-based trauma. So essentially, when she broke my water, it strung him up, and he was kind of hung by the cord in the womb.
Oh,
And so, which
okay.
cut off oxygen to his brain.
Oh.
And so, for that 7 minute period, while they were racing me to the OR, he like didn't have any oxygen. So she's
Mm.
explaining to me all the things, and I was so out of it and hysterical that most of it probably went over my head. And then my husband called me from the NICU, and he was like, "Whoa, you have to calm down." Like, they want to bring the baby to you so you can see him before they transfer him to another hospital.
Mhm.
But we can't do that if you're like freaking out. Like, you have to calm down. And so I tried. And my husband texted me a picture of our son, which was the first time I ever saw him, was in a picture
Mm.
that my husband texted me.
Mhm.
And then they brought the baby, and I was, numb because I'd still had an epidural, and I was all drugged, and I could barely move, and he was in an incubator, and so I could barely like touch his hand for like a second before they took him away to a hospital that was 30 minutes away, where they did medically induced hypothermia, which is supposed to reduce brain swelling.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. Um, so he was in a different hospital from me, and I got moved to the postpartum unit, and my nurses were like, "Oh, where's your baby?" And it was extremely difficult. And one of the most difficult parts of it was this whole C-section incision of mine. I ended up having an allergic reaction to the glue that they used on the Medivac. If you've had any abdominal procedure, you're probably familiar with that. It's like a machine that, like, I don't know, like sucks fluids or something from around the incision so that it can heal faster or something. Well, I had an allergic reaction to the glue, and then they ended up putting me on all these really strong antibiotics. I personally like hate pain pills. I hate what they do to my head, and I kind of avoid them at all costs. And here I was in the hospital, like begging for more because I was in such an extreme amount of pain. And then I had like my father-in-law there going, "I've had abdominal surgery. This is nothing. You just have to get up and walk, walk, walk." And they tried to get me to walk, and I'd get up, and I would make, half-inch steps and just sob, because even on crazy amounts of pain meds, the pain was phenomenal. Like, it was
Mhm.
so extreme. I mean, for a while, I didn't think I'd ever be able to walk again. Like, it was so awful. So I was in the hospital for like 4 or 5 days. It was not long enough. I was like, I still can't walk. I don't know how you expect me to go home. Um, and my son was in the NICU of a different hospital, and he was the fattest baby in the NICU. He was somewhere a little bit over 8 pounds, 8.5 pounds. I'm not sure what his exact birth weight was, but he was the fattest baby in the NICU. They
Mhm.
did medically induced hypothermia for like 2 days, I think. He's 8 now, so this has been a while. um, and then they slowly brought him back. Like, he's unconscious while they lower his body temperature to keep him knocked out. So they brought his body temperature back up, and they let him wake up, and all he wanted to do was eat. Was all he wanted. And he was fine. They told us going in that he would probably be in the NICU for 3 weeks. He was in the NICU for 6 days, and he passed every test with flying colors, and he came out with a perfectly beautiful, clean bill of health. And the whole situation was like so much trauma, like so much. so much
Yeah.
trauma. And one of the things that I love to say, like in my podcast and when I'm talking to people, is that there are blessings in every trial and trials in every blessing. So this was
Hmm.
like a huge, miraculous thing that like happened to our family, but it was one of the most difficult things I've ever been through. And I think it's worth noting that while, my husband and my newborn and I are going through all this, I still had two toddlers at
Hmm.
home. And my daughter was okay, but my son Joshua, who's severely autistic, I mean, he was 3 at this time, he started banging his head on things. Mom all of a sudden was gone out of nowhere. And he started banging his head on the walls and banging his head on windows because he was so upset that I wasn't there anymore and he did not understand. And like the
Yeah.
amount of stress that added to my poor husband while I was in the hospital was like it was just so difficult. And I mean, on top of all that, like my husband was disabled and like on pain meds for his own like things that he was going through. And so he's trying to like table all of that stuff, his own
Hmm.
personal stuff, while I'm going through this horrible thing. And it's amazing how all of those layers add up, and it's really easy to separate them and just look at one and not consider the whole picture of what's really going on.
Wow. That is quite the story. And like you said, just miraculous and just such a blessing that he's safe, he's here, he came back. I mean,
Yeah.
wow. And I mean you just said it perfectly, like so many different layers of trauma. Like you can consider all of them separately, but they really all add, like when you step back and just look at the whole thing, that's just like wow.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Wow. Um, how do you process that? How do you grieve, what you were maybe hoping or dreaming for a birth? What did that look like for you coming home? I mean, you had two young children who who need you as children, but they also need you in different ways as well. And
Well, and they
then
were
you have a
toddlers. They were
newborn.
3 and 4, and 3 and 4 year olds tend to be pretty wild and hyper. And
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I mean, so you just have to deal with the different things as they come. And so, like, initially, it was about me healing. Like, I couldn't
Mm-hmm.
walk. And my incision actually ended up having to be packed,
Yeah.
which honestly is one of the most just horrific and disgusting things that I can think about.
Mm-hmm.
And my husband happily and without any issue came in and did that medical care for me that I could not do for myself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it will forever endear me to him, no matter what we've been through. Like the level of service he showed me during that time was
Mm-hmm.
remarkable. And we went through some really awful stuff, like in our relationship, like following that, like our relationship had been on the rocks for a while. And like that was one of the things that really was like, I know that he loves me. I know that because he did that for me, which is so awful. And he did that for me.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah,
What brought you closer together? I mean,
yeah, for
you
sure.
both you both went through that trauma, but on different planes, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also really interesting to look back. Aurora and Joshua, my older two, were diagnosed with autism right about 3 years old. Benjamin wasn't diagnosed until he was like 6, uh, which was really interesting because um, looking back, a lot of his symptoms are actually PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm wondering, here we are, and he has some behavior issues, and his teachers at school are using this TBRI method, which is for children who have a lot of trauma, and I'm going, how much of this trauma that he endured as an infant that we kind of sat there and were like, oh, he's got this clean bill of health, everything's great. How much did that affect him as he went
Hmm.
through his life? Like that was the biggest thing that's ever happened to him, like trauma wise.
Yeah.
I mean, in the following years, my husband was in the hospital a lot, and he has a severely autistic brother who picks on him a little bit, but like his early birth trauma, like we think that those things, it's like, oh, well, it's over and it's done. But those things have such lingering effects in our lives.
They do. And I'm glad that you bring that up because I think that as adults, we only assume that we are the ones carrying and holding that trauma because we remember it, we can recall it, we went through it, but they went through it too. And just because they might not be able to remember or speak to it, they do hold that trauma. That trauma is imprinted on
Well, and
them.
it's like he was born and never touched me for 6 days.
Yeah.
Like I kind of touched his finger a tiny bit, but like
Hmm.
that mother infant bond when the baby is
Hmm.
first born is like so essential, and we did not get
Yeah.
that. Like I didn't get to hold him until he was 6 days old, which I know that like there are so many people who have so like we were so blessed that it was only 6 days. Like I know the people that it was months and months and months, but
Hmm.
still that like early bond between mother and child, like we missed such a huge chunk of that, and it's really essential. It's so like
Yeah.
I see it as this. It's really interesting to look at my three kids. Now, my daughter, actually, it turns out that all three of my kids were strung up by the cord, but they didn't have as dramatic an effect as my youngest. So my daughter was in the NICU for about an hour. I held her at 10 minutes old because she had swallowed some fluid. So those 10 minutes, like I feel like even in our relationship today, I feel that distance, that like 10-minute distance. And my second Joshua, immediately I got to hold him. I'm sorry, I just snapped into the mic. I didn't realize. Um, I got to hold him immediately, and I'd had this huge, horrific, traumatic birth, but then he was there on me immediately. And I wonder how much of our relationship now, of our connection, how much of it has to do with that immediate, right from birth
Hmm.
connection that is just so essential. And I feel like medical doctors and hospitals do not prioritize that. I mean, yes, they have to prioritize the health, but they're not maybe prioritizing mental health as much.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Because that releases so many chemicals. I mean, oxytocin for one, for both mom and baby, and so many other intricate things that we just don't even know. Like it can't
Yeah.
be tested. You can't see it with the human eye. You can't test it with labs. Just so many
It's an
important
emotional
things.
intertwinement.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a really
It's like it's
tough.
like two people at their most vulnerable moment.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like part of your birth story that you were explaining, like full informed consent was almost like not even there for you. No one explained what was going on, um, or the ketamine either. Like, hey, this is what we're going to give you. These are some potential side effects, that you
Yep,
can
no
expect.
idea. I had no clue. Which and I'm
Um,
like, I get it that they had to they didn't have time, they had to get him out. And you kind of sign your life away when you enter the hospital. Like you sign all those rights away in the name of what is it going to take to save a life.
yeah. Hmm.
And then you have to start wondering how much of those life-saving measures are as essential as they say.
Hmm. Oh, that's a whole nother topic. That's a
Right.
whole nother conversation
I know.
that we could get into. But luckily for you, you got to bring your baby home. And
Yeah.
obviously, the three of, well, all of you, really, all of you have a different piece of trauma that you have to work through. Even your two kiddos at home, you know, mom was gone for what, 6 days, and when
Out of
she
the
came
blue.
back,
Well, and then I
mom
had to
wasn't quite the
drive.
same.
Yep, couldn't move. And then my youngest was at a hospital 30 minutes away. And so it was an hour, and they couldn't go. It was an
Hmm.
hour just of driving, not including the time we spent there with him. So even when I did get home, I wasn't really home.
Hmm. Yeah. So were you podcasting at this point, or when did you start doing that?
No, I started my podcast about a year ago.
A year ago.
Yep.
Okay. So what was the final inspiration to just be like, it must have been on your mind, and then
So
something must have just been like, I'm just gonna do it.
so it goes back a little ways. I was in college working on my bachelor's degree for like 12 years. Like I met my husband in 2008 and we were in college together, and then I had my daughter in 2010, and then we moved away, and they like had this dumb rule that I wasn't allowed to do classes online for 2 years after I moved away from campus. So that
Hmm.
was super dumb because I was planning on finishing my degree online when we moved away, and then I couldn't. And then we moved again, and then I was able to do classes online because we moved from Utah where we were in college, and then we moved to California where my second was born, and then we moved to Texas where my youngest was born. So if, a little bit after my like he was probably less than 6 months old, was when I started doing classes online, and my other two were in ABA therapy, so they'd go to school all day, and then I would take them out an hour early to do 4 hours of ABA every afternoon at the clinic. And I would go sit down there with them and do homework. And so then my husband had our youngest because he was home and disabled. So that was its own kind of thing. But so I was doing college forever. And then we moved back to Utah in 2018. So my youngest was about 4. And so that we could both finish our degrees. Because my husband tried to do his online and he just couldn't concentrate on it. He actually had undiagnosed ADHD. So we moved back in 2018 to finish our degrees online, or to finish our degrees on campus. And I chose to double major. So I added an extra
Hmm.
year on, and I double majored in college, and I graduated in 2021. And then when I was finally done with school, it was like, okay, now what do I want to do with
Hmm.
my life? And even though I was like, I'm a mom of 3 kids with autism and we have constant therapy and my life is crazy, I was like, I have to have something for me. Like, I have to, like, when I was in school, like, I was studying uh, costume design and makeup design and theater, and I loved it so much. But I've always wanted to do music, and so I started working on my album. And I've spent about the last year working on my album, and it's almost done. And then when I started, it was sort of like I opened the floodgates of like, what do I want to do? And it started with the music, but I felt like the music was taking so long. Like, the amount of time it takes to write a song compared to like do a podcast episode is ridiculous. It takes months to like
Hmm.
get all the details worked out of a song and have it like be the final product. Whereas a podcast episode, I can interview you in an hour, edit it for a little bit, and then there it is. And I have so much to say that I couldn't get out fast enough in my
Hmm.
music, which I love singing, but I wanted that platform to be able to talk to people and share my story and do what I could to help people in kind of a faster way than the music was taking. Because as much as I love the music and I love singing, it just kind of felt like it wasn't quite fast enough. Like I was learning so much, but the
Hmm.
podcast is a place to really um, to communicate with people. Writing my own music and doing that whole thing, I love it, but it's very much a me by myself I'm working on this. Whereas the podcast, it's like I get to connect with people. And that's something that, as a mom of three kids with autism, that I've kind of been missing in my life because it's always felt like I was kind of alone in this, like isolated, because we can't do like typical play groups. My kids aren't doing sports. So we're not connecting with other people in typical ways. And so this is kind of my outlet to get to know people. And what's really fun is I get the opportunity to talk to people who do have similar circumstances, who are also feeling disconnected from the world and who also have had similar struggles. And there's so many more people than I ever would have thought, like going through the worst of it. There's so many more people who have been through maybe what I would consider worse than what I've been through, and who have had all of these struggles. And it's so therapeutic and important for all of these people who are a lot like me to get to share our stories with the world. Like, it just, that it's such a great way to help you process what you've been through, and then to look at it from the other side and go, oh, I can see how my life was guided. I can see the sunshine and the goodness, even though my life was crumbling apart. And to be able to look at that in hindsight and help other people do that too is so beautiful.
Yeah, I that's amazing. You are finding something that you enjoy for yourself as a mom, a busy mom, which is so important. When we become moms, we do lose some of our original identity. So it's really, really important to kind of create what is our identity now as a mom? Like, what is something that I love and enjoy and can make time for? So you're doing that
Absolutely.
for yourself.
Well, and we have to. We
Yeah.
have to do that. We have to find the thing that is just for us,
Mm-hmm.
And it's when you go on play dates, it's like, well, it's really for the kids. And if you happen to find a friend, then yay, good for you, but it's really for the kids. And it's, we give up so much of ourselves for our kids. We can't give up every last bit.
Yeah.
We have to hold on to something. If we,
Yeah.
because how else are you supposed to keep going when it's really hard and taking care of your kids is so stressful? Like, you have to know who you are and what you love, and know that you will have the opportunity to show the world your own passions and your own brilliance and your own, amazingness, because you're an amazing person outside of being a mother.
Mm-hmm.
Being a mother is not what makes you amazing. You're just an amazing human, and you have to like be able to know that for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And all the while you're helping so many other people too, while
Thank
you're filling your cup up. So that's really beautiful and amazing.
And
So
I love it.
tell the audience the name of your podcast, where they can find it, and where they can learn more and connect with you.
Awesome. Well, my podcast is called Seeking Sunshine. So you can find that anywhere that you listen to podcasts. My website is caroleighgarrison.com. And my name's hard to spell, so that's KARALEIGHGARRISON.com. And everything's on there. The music, the podcast, it's all right in that place. I think I'm Karaleigh Garrison Music on most of the social media platforms. So it's fun. I
Awesome.
love
Yeah,
it.
and I'll add that to the show notes for sure. So, do you have any closing thoughts that you'd like to end with?
Just to reiterate that, like, every single person who is listening, like, you have your own beautiful, incredible core that has nothing to do with whatever life has thrown your way. Like, you shine, and the world like needs to see that from each of us. Like, that's what makes the world such a beautiful, glorious place, is that each of us has so many gifts to give.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. Yeah, we just have to believe it, see it, and tap into it, and then
Hmm.
and then we can shine it and there's really other people can benefit from you shining your light for sure.
Yes. And it's really like a lot of us, we tend to think that like there's only so much light. There's only so many people who can talk, and so I should be quiet so other people can be heard. But that's actually like the opposite. What
Hmm.
really happens is that the more that you open up, the more other people feel like it's okay for them to open up and take up space.
Hmm.
As you allow yourself to be a person who exists, who is worthy of existing and taking up room and being heard, the more that you communicate to the rest of the world that they also are worthy of taking up space and
Hmm.
being heard.
Yeah. And I think the world today needs that for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and your light with us
Absolutely.
today. And thank you for tuning in today. Make sure you follow and leave a rating so we can connect with more mamas. And I will see you on the next episode.